This is a topic that I have been wanting to revisit for a while now. Back in 2021, I made a video discussing why I found the Switch to be somewhat disappointing. I never felt satisfied with the original video, and I keep going back to the script despite having a fairly successful urban planning channel that is more worth putting time into. I just feel compelled to get this off my chest because I haven't really seen many people talk about what might be wrong with the Switch and what a future successor could be doing better. I do not like the Switch era. I do consider myself a Nintendo fan. I have been playing their games and enjoying their consoles since the GameCube era. When it comes to the Switch era, I can't shake the feeling that something is missing. Maybe it's nostalgia talking, but I might have been happier with Nintendo during the Wii U and the 3DS era. I wasn't always a downer on the Switch. In fact, when it was first unveiled, I was excited for the prospect of having all of Nintendo's handheld and home console games on one device. I never put much time into the handheld consoles. It's nothing against them, I just prefer playing games on a TV, where they can really shine on the big screen. I was looking forward to being able to try the new Fire Emblem, Pokemon, Kirby, Mario & Luigi, and other games that had a big showing on the 3DS, but nowhere to be seen on the Wii U. Plus, since the Switch is an HD console, developers should be able to use the Switch's hardware to produce some amazing visuals that are the best in the series. You know, looking back, I might have been a little too optimistic. Overall, it had the makings of Nintendo's best console. Perhaps to some people, it is the best. I certainly understand the appeal of the Switch. The hybrid nature makes it flexible for people who cannot always be glued to a TV. Having all of Nintendo's games on one device allows far more people to play Nintendo's exclusives than ever before. I did have a positive opinion of this console when it launched in 2017. The launch year was phenomenal. It kicked off with the highly anticipated Breath of the Wild. The months that followed featured ARMS, Splatoon 2, Mario & Rabbids, Mario Odyssey, and the year rounded off with Xenoblade Chronicles 2. All of these were fantastic games that really added value to the Switch's launch lineup. It looked like there was a great future ahead of this console. Then, over time, the cracks started to show, and Nintendo never really did anything to address them.
Luigi!
Yeah, those kinds of cracks. By the end of 2020, when Microsoft and Sony were gearing up to join Nintendo in the 9th console generation, I really started to question whether or not I was liking the Switch. The catalyst for my realization that maybe the Switch isn't actually that great was playing Pikmin 3 Deluxe. Here's the deal. I had a Wii U. I already played a lot of the Wii U ports when they originally released. I honestly can't shake the feeling that being a Wii U owner has devalued the Switch. I know this may be an unpopular opinion, especially when considering the size of the Switch's library, but allow me to paint a picture. It's been Mario Kart 8 again, Lego City Undercover again, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze again, Captain Toad again, New Super Mario Bros. U again, Tokyo Mirage Sessions again, Wonderful 101 again, Pikmin 3 again, Super Mario 3D World again, and for the sake of making this video future-proof, Xenoblade Chronicles X, Wind Waker HD, and Twilight Princess again. Does it ever feel like you are being resold on a console that you already had? I get it. The Wii U was a colossal failure for Nintendo, and this is a way to recoup their losses. However, as a fan, I don't really care about the business reasons. I just want fun games to play. These games are certainly great. I absolutely recommend them for anyone who missed out on the Wii U. They just don't add anything to the library when I already played them years ago upon their initial release. The same kind of applies for other remasters as well. Skyward Sword and Xenoblade Chronicles 1 are great games. I just wish the re-releases were for a game that I haven't played yet. I have nothing against remaking or porting games, so they can be updated for a new audience. I am just tired of it being so one-sided towards the Wii U. You know what other console didn't sell quite as well as any of other Nintendo's consoles? The GameCube. This console only managed to scrape by 20 million consoles sold, which is less than Nintendo 64, less than the Super Nintendo, and less than the Nintendo Entertainment System. Why hasn't the GameCube seen this treatment? Wind Waker HD was made in 6 months. They made an official emulator for Super Mario Sunshine. I can't help but feel disappointed that Nintendo remade a GameCube game and said, nope, no more GameCube remakes. And similarly with Super Mario Sunshine, made an emulator and said, nope, no more GameCube re-releases. I am sure there are plenty of other GameCube games people want to play either for the first time or to return to, but have no official means of doing so. I, for one, would love to see a version of Path of Radiance or Chibi Robo that wasn't priced upwards of $300. It would be great to see a full remaster on the scale of Wind Waker HD, but for the games that aged fine like Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door, an emulated version would suffice. I don't take issue with the Wii U ports. I just wish the ports and remakes had more to offer than game I already played again. And the few times it is more than reselling me on a game that I already played, it is genuinely a good game that adds value to the Switch's library. There are probably only 2 Wii U ports that I'm genuinely disappointed with. Super Mario 3D World is one of them, not because of the game itself, but you are forced to buy this game to play Bowser's Fury. I just don't want to spend $60 on a game that I already owned. I don't think there is a compelling reason that Bowser's Fury couldn't be a standalone title on the eShop. The other major disappointment was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I can only play on the same tracks with the same characters, using the same items, and listening to the same music for so long before I just want to play something new, something different. Mario Kart 8 released in 2014. At the time of making this script, it's been over 8 years, and it's still going with DLC until the end of 2023. This game will be pushing a decade old before we get any sign of a new Mario Kart. I am bored of this game, and I don't think the DLC makes up for no new racing game. It's not like they have nothing that could fill the void of no new Mario Kart game. They could bring back F-Zero, Excitebike, Diddy Kong Racing, or something. It doesn't have to be Mario Kart. Sure, Mario Kart sells better, but I still want to see a new racing game. One would be plenty. Since Nintendo is instead taking the low investment, high return route, I get the impression that they are playing it safe and not fully taking advantage of their IP in a generation where pretty much anything they release becomes the fastest selling and best selling game in the series. It would be a huge missed opportunity to not use the success of the Switch in order to give these games a chance for success that they haven't seen in a long time. Unfortunately, it seems like if it's not a part of a major franchise, it won't happen this gen. In fact, that's one of the things that is missing from the Switch era. There haven't been a whole lot of revivals or new IPs outside of ARMS and Metroid Dread. Instead, it's just the usual big pillars, even if there's already a big pillar game from that series on the Switch. I am certainly not saying that Nintendo only has remakes and re-releases to offer. That couldn't be further from the case. However, from what I've seen, a good chunk of the Switch's best games are Wii U ports, because there are too many games that are held back by the annoying finish it later strategy. Throughout the Switch era, Nintendo has had an annoying habit of releasing blatantly unfinished games and later trickling 3 or so updates that kind of address the complaints just to leave the game in a half-baked state. Practically every one of their multiplayer games have had this issue. Super Mario Strikers is the most recent game with this problem. The game launched with an anemic roster, no stage gimmicks, and only a few game modes. Probably the saddest part of the game is not having any stage gimmicks. I love the idea of taking 2 different stage themes and mashing them together. It's really creative, and it emboldens the sense of this is their turf and this is our turf. Not having stage gimmicks is a huge letdown, because this mechanic amounts to the color of grass. They didn't even change the texture of the grass for the desert and space levels. So it's just a color swap and a different background that you can only see in cutscenes. On top of that, it's missing content. Mario Tennis Aces and Mario Golf Super Rush both had their own story modes. The implementation of each story mode was questionable sometimes, but at least it had them. Mario Strikers is just a bunch of challenges. It genuinely sucks for people who are both familiar with the franchise and have been waiting 15 years for a new game in the series, and for people who wanted to have a chance to play Mario Strikers for the first time. I think it might have been better if Nintendo just remastered the first two games with online play, especially if the new game is going to be this insincere about being better than its predecessors. Once again, too many of their multiplayer games are like this. Mario Tennis Aces didn't even have stage select at launch. You had to go through this convoluted system of toggles in order to select the stage that you wanted. Nintendo Switch Sports launched with a leg strap accessory that you couldn't even use until a future update. It's hard to get excited for Nintendo's online multiplayer games, knowing they aren't going to be given the time they deserve to be a meaningful experience. I know I just got done complaining about the lack of racing games this gen, but does anyone really trust Nintendo with a multiplayer racing game that isn't Mario Kart? It's very telling when one of these multiplayer online games are announced, and instead of feeling excitement, you're thinking, man, I wonder what content is going to be missing this time. There are probably only a few exceptions to the finish it later strategy. Super Mario Maker 2 and Splatoon had a trickle of updates at launch, but the base games were compelling enough that it wasn't too much of an issue. I also thought it was fine for ARMS because, much like Splatoon on the Wii U, it was a new IP, so I can let it slide for a bit. I want to call Smash an exception, but at the same time, we did have to wait for Home Run Contest and Stage Builder. It's a little weird that we had to wait for modes that were already in the Wii U game. I think that's the biggest disappointment about the fix-it-later strategy. It's rarely ever content that is genuinely new to the series, it's just waiting for what other games had available since day one. It's rather disappointing. Nintendo used to be praised for giving their games the time they needed to be a complete, polished product. Now, instead of waiting until the game is ready, they rush it out in a lackluster state to a lukewarm reception, and it's forgotten about shortly after. They still delay games when it comes to their single-player content. They delayed Tears of the Kingdom to the summer of next year. They scrapped and rebooted Metroid Prime 4 because they didn't think it was up to their quality standards. And they delayed Fire Emblem Three Houses several times. I mean, I thought the game still sucked, but it could have been a lot worse. It's kind of sad that the same treatment isn't granted to their multiplayer games, when they probably would still sell just as fine, if not better, if they had another 6 months or a year in order to really flesh out that content and nail down the game. Those are the main issues I have with the Switch exclusives. Too many ports or remasters of games I already played, and too many finish it later games. I'm not trying to say the Switch library is bad as a whole or anything, there just haven't been a whole lot of compelling exclusives that I genuinely enjoyed. In fact, let's take a look at this chart comparing Wii U games I liked to Switch games I liked. That's right. Despite the droughts, short lifespan, and split development, the Wii U has almost as many exclusives I liked as the Switch did. I kept looking back and forth between each console's library to make sure I wasn't missing anything, but I wasn't. This is a complete list of enjoyable games. I hope this helps people understand why I say owning a Wii U devalues the Switch. The Switch's worthwhile library basically doubles if you didn't have a Wii U, so if you did have one, it's cut in half. Obviously, the list is subjective, it's just my personal opinion of which games across both platforms are worth playing. Nonetheless, it is pretty telling that the Switch is not that much better in terms of exclusives than the Wii U was. It's kind of a sad realization, but I probably could have just waited until late 2020 or sometime in 2021 to buy a Switch, and I wouldn't have missed out on much. It is easier to say this now that everything is all said and done, because I am basically comparing Wii U exclusives to Switch exclusives one-to-one, and there was a lot of droughts between first-party releases, and there wasn't much third-party support, especially after 2014, leading to a lot of people asking,
where the video games? Where the video? Oh! breathe.
That's honestly what makes the Switch feel more disappointing than the Wii U. The Switch doesn't exactly have those disadvantages. It has a lot of third-party support, and Nintendo is not splitting their development. Yet, the Switch now has new issues that the Wii U and the 3DS did not have. They're releasing lackluster games, so the ones that I genuinely wanted to enjoy just weren't particularly good, and it makes the first-party offerings on the Switch feel like a tremendous mixed bag. On one hand, you have fantastic games like Super Mario Odyssey, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Luigi's Mansion 3, and on the other hand, you have bad or mediocre games like Fire Emblem Three Houses, Pokemon Sword and Shield, and Mario Strikers. This is coupled with the insubstantial sequels. I combine Splatoon 2 and 3 because I don't think they are different enough to justify having two new Splatoon games. I omit Smash Ultimate because to me, it never felt like a big enough difference from Smash 4 to justify being its own game. I feel like they could have just ported Smash 4 and completed the roster by adding Ice Climbers, Snake, and whatever else was missing, and then called it a day. Smash Ultimate doesn't seem to add much that the Wii U game didn't already do. The Switch absolutely should have had the better library, but when I filter out these kinds of disappointments, I am left with a console that barely seems to be any better than the Wii U, despite all of its flaws. If I were to add the 3DS to the mix, it wouldn't even be close. Nintendo had more games that I liked last gen during the Wii U and the 3DS era than this one, and that's a big part of why I liked them more a decade ago than now. Combining both the Wii U and the 3DS would add 2 Kirby games, 3 Fire Emblem games, several Mario games, 2 Zelda games, and maybe even more. Now, I never expected Switch output to match the Wii U and the 3DS combined, but I figured it should at least have been better than the Wii U alone. It's pretty disappointing that it feels like I probably should have just bought a 3DS sooner in its lifespan and waited to buy a Switch. I know I am putting a lot of emphasis on first party, but bear in mind, I buy Nintendo consoles to play Nintendo's games. The third party games, when they do happen, are more of a bonus. When I look at the third party in a vacuum, I'm left with the feeling that I am better off sticking to Xbox or PC for any multi-platform games. I don't really care much for portability. I want to play games on a TV, and I want the experiences to be visually appealing when they are blown up on the big screen. That's where I run into the first major problem. For a lot of these third-party multi-platform games, I can get cheaper, better versions that release sooner on other consoles. Not every game was as bad as The Outer Worlds, but that was the game that broke me. Months after it originally released, it finally came to the Switch, and at launch, it was basically unplayable. It had atrocious frame rates, egregious pop-in, and ugly visuals. It wasn't worth waiting the extra time for what was ultimately the worst version of the game. It did get marginally better with patches, but that only furthers my point. Switch owners had to wait longer for the worst version. It would have been better if I just bought it on Xbox or PC and acted like the Switch version didn't even exist. This is just an extreme case. There is plenty of other better ports on the Switch. But still, I do wish there was more parity between the Switch versions and other console versions. Without that, I don't see much of a compelling reason to make the Switch my primary console to play third-party games. The third-party support on the Switch may be better than it was on the Wii U. Not like that was a high bar or anything. But if I'm constantly looking at these games and thinking that I should have bought them elsewhere, having more third-party support doesn't necessarily mean it is the better console for me, because they both have the same issues where I would rather go somewhere else to play these games. Outer Worlds was the most painful multi-platform release because I just have a hard time finding third-party games I actually want to play on the Switch. It seems to me that a lot of the third-party support that dominates the Switch's library stems from re-releases, remakes, JRPGs, simulation games, and anime games. I have nothing against these kinds of games, and I'm not trying to sound like they're bad or anything, they just don't exactly appeal to my tastes. Farming and simulation games can be really time-consuming, so unless you're really hooked into the gameplay, it can be very hard to actually get into it. Outside of something like RimWorld or Factorio, there haven't been a whole lot of games in this genre that I genuinely enjoyed. I just don't need 20 of these kinds of games. The Switch is often touted as being the king of JRPGs. I tried to like Triangle Strategy, Octopath Traveler, Bravely Default, Dragon Quest, The World Ends With You, Persona. I tried so hard to like this genre, and in the end, it didn't even matter. I've tried all sorts of JRPGs, and I just can't get into this genre. I don't like the gameplay in them. They are too slow to get into, and if you aren't super engaged with the story or the turn-based combat, they can be a slog. Do note that I actually did like Dragon Quest XI, but I swear to God, when you've played one of these JRPGs, you've played them all. I can probably count on my fingertips the number of traditional JRPGs that I actually like. Other less traditional JRPGs like Xenoblade or Tales of Arise and Star Ocean, I actually do like, but they don't exactly follow the strict turn-based combat and grind for 50 hours gameplay that you see in a lot of other JRPGs. I am certainly not saying these games shouldn't be on the Switch, but I can't help but feel left out when I see all these people clamoring about how the Switch is an amazing hotspot for JRPGs, and I'm sitting here asking, when is it gonna be my turn? When are they going to announce a major third-party game that I want to play? Not just an impossible port that happened months or years after the game has originally released, but something that's day and date with other consoles and is a really good version on the Switch. It does happen, but it's kind of rare. I guess the problem is, my tastes are more aligned with Western games than Japanese games. If I want to play something like the new God of War, the much anticipated Starfield, Batman Arkham, Cyberpunk 2077, there's almost nothing. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely been good third-party games on the Switch, and plenty of indie games as well, even if I bought them on other consoles. I could come up with a list of third-party games I actually liked on the Switch, or I would have liked if I bought them on the Switch, but I don't think that would really accomplish much. It's not really a matter of whether or not the Switch has third-party support, it's a matter of what console I want to play these games on, and when it comes to console exclusives, whether or not I'm excited to play them on the Switch. There isn't a single JRPG that I can point to and say that I am as excited to play it as I am with Starfield. God, I want to go to space. I don't get why so many Western developers pretend the Switch doesn't exist. It's like they were burned by the Wii U, and even after 120 million Switches sold, they have never let it go. There are certainly third-party games I liked, both from major studios and indie developers. I'm just at a point where I have given up on multi-platform games on the Switch. I would rather stick to Xbox or PC since they are far better for TV play than the Switch is. I don't even need the bells and whistles of 4K HDR and ray tracing. I just want to be able to confidently buy a game without worrying that it'll be the worst version. It gets to a point where all I can say is, I don't care enough about portability to buy third-party games on the Switch, and I would rather get them elsewhere. When I get right down to it, the Switch's library doesn't have a whole lot of games that I genuinely want to play. There are other, admittedly smaller issues that I have with the Switch. Games are the most important aspect of a console, so instead of dwelling on the other problems, here's a quick lightning round. Number 1, I don't like the one-size-fits-all nature to the Switch. Individual users can't have their own groups and their own controller mappings. The home menu always displays the last 10 games that you have played. The customization options are severely lacking. There's no way to tailor the Switch's UI to a user's individual preferences. Number 2, the eShop is really sluggish. It's difficult to rely on it for general browsing because as you keep scrolling down the list of games, it'll just get more and more laggy. You basically have to rely on third-party solutions like Deku Deals in order to find anything worth playing on the eShop. It's too bad Nintendo hasn't really addressed how hard it is to actually sift through all the shovelware and garbage in order to find something that's actually worth playing. Number 3, I don't like that the expansion pack is required for Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis games. It kind of stinks for people who only want to play Nintendo 64 games because they're asked to pay another $30 a year just to get to the consoles that they want. I think it would be a lot better if Nintendo had a fixed price membership for all of the classic consoles that they have. I mean, could you imagine if Microsoft was like, you need this version of Game Pass if you want to play Xbox One games, this version of Game Pass if you want to play Series X enhanced games, this version of Game Pass if you want to play original Xbox games. No, they just have one flavor of Game Pass for all of the games that are on Game Pass, depending on which console, of course, between PC and Xbox because they're different libraries, which is understandable. In fact, I think that's a big part of why people were mad about the whole Switch expansion. It's another $30 a year, and what does it really get you? 2 new consoles to play on, and some expansion packs for games that you might not even have? It doesn't really add much value. Speaking of which, number 4, Nintendo is charging at least $20 a year for online, without any unifying social feature like the Wii U and the 3DS had. When online was free, Nintendo had Miiverse and Street Pass. Miiverse was a really cool feature that made a lot of the Nintendo worlds feel livelier, because there was this user-generated content that would populate the worlds. In Wind Waker HD, Miiverse posts were in the Tingle bottles. In Splatoon, it was graffiti for the environments. In fact, something like Miiverse is perfect for me as a more casual player. I don't want to play online games competitively. I just want to sit back and have fun. And this kind of asynchronous multiplayer interaction that we saw with Miiverse, where you can just make a post of your cool accomplishment or a cool screenshot and have it populate the world somewhere, was all I really needed. That would have been perfect to make Switch Online feel worth $20 a year. As of now, it just feels like we are paying for online and not getting a whole lot out of it that we didn't get when online was free. Number 5, there's no Nintendo Selects. It was great having $20 re-releases of quality Nintendo games. Contrast to now, where Nintendo's games launch for the typical price of $60 and they almost never get a permanent price drop, I can't help but miss when Nintendo actually had cheap games of high quality. It would be great if they brought that back for the Switch era, so I can impulse buy some games that I'm on the fence about. Number 6, I do miss the sketches. They were a fun, quirky way to talk about Nintendo's games, and they always added something interesting to watch during the Nintendo Directs. It was fun to see Reggie, Iwata, or Bill Trinan do something silly during these presentations. It made them feel more like people who genuinely wanted to talk about these games, and not just a bunch of corporate suits who talked about business verticals and profit margins all day. Without that element, the Directs just feel like sizzle reels for a bunch of games, which, to be fair, is what they always were, but the presentations aren't as fun without them. None of these are big issues per se, but it does culminate into a console that does nothing but turn on and play games. It's too bad Nintendo isn't expending the effort to improve the overall user experience. I was able to let it slide in 2017, but as the years go by, it leaves more to be desired. This is where I am at with the Switch. I don't think it is nostalgia talking when I speak more fondly of the Wii U or the 3DS than this console. I think it's more of a matter of fatigue. The Wii U had a short lifespan of 4 years, so it couldn't overstay its welcome. I didn't pay much attention to the 3DS because I was disinterested in handheld play, but looking back, I kind of regret not having a 3DS sooner. With the Switch, on the other hand, this console has been pushing 6 years, which is longer than a typical console generation. Practically every major franchise has 1 or 2 iterations in some form. It feels like we're at a point where it is all said and done, and anything I could want to see from Nintendo is probably going to have to wait until new hardware. At this point, I am ready for Nintendo to move on and hopefully release a console that can capture what I actually liked about the Wii U and the 3DS. They have made so much money this gen that it would be a shame if they play it safe and release a modest successor that's a bit more powerful, but basically the same in every other aspect, including the flaws. I want them to deliver in terms of console features, the first-party lineup, and having interesting third-party games. I want their next console to make it feel exciting to be a Nintendo fan, and it hasn't been for a couple of years now.